Well, thanks to our three panelists. So Emmanuel Bacry, you know him because he has been there for the whole morning New York time, afternoon for him. I would want to introduce the other two panelists. So Wendy Chang is a distinguished researcher at the Mercator Institute, which is an institute focusing on China based in Berlin. And Antoine Bordes has been a researcher with Meta and is now working with a new defense company, Helsing. And so in this morning, I mean, you have seen the sequence. We started with a presentation on AI by Emmanuel so that you would understand what is under the hood, so to speak. And then we moved on to discussing the critical role of data and all the issues that data raise. And through data, we started actually touching upon geopolitical issues because we clearly see that different countries, different continents do not have the same approach to data, do not have the same understanding of what public goods are. So we see questions of power relations between the public and the private emerging. In the panel now, the concluding panel of this morning, we really want them to focus on things that you can relate more directly to because they are about essentially power, politics, and the regulation of power. And maybe to get us started, I will start by asking Emmanuel Bacry to give us a bit a sense of how this new technological wave, this digitalization of the world, how it redistributes power, because we have focused a lot on data, we have focused on computing power, but there's a whole value chain, so to speak, which starts with the chips that are necessary for high-level computing, the energy that is required to run those computing systems. And we have already discussed, the question of the volume of data necessary, which raises questions on the volume of energy. And then there's, of course, the science behind it. Where is the science? Where are the researchers? And then there is the putting all that together. So we see that there are different chokeholds, so to speak. And to structure this panel, so I will ask Emmanuel to sort of set the stage, and then I will turn to Wendy to tell us more about China and how China relates to technology, and then to Antoine Bordes, so having moved from a tech, one of the big tech companies, Meta, to a defense company, and seeing now from a European standpoint how power is impacted and how defense directly is impacted. So that's the logic of our conversation now. Emmanuel, over to you.
Yeah, okay, it's not an easy task. I'll do my best. And I'll try to finish by questions also, because I think there are plenty of open questions. But to make it simple, I tried to list the main factors of AI that redraw the power map of the world, and I could name mainly 4 of them, but of course there are many more, but you named already a few of them. So that first one, that is everything that is related to resources. So of course, particularly the rare earth elements and critical minerals like lithium or cobalt. We all know that these materials are essential for producing advanced chips, and particularly GPUs, and TPUs that are used for training these the AI models. So of course, countries with access to these resources gain a significant advantage in controlling the hardware supply chain. Second point, you mentioned it's energy. Look, we all know that it requires training models requires vast amounts of electricity, and of course countries that can provide cheap, reliable energy and have an edge in hosting the massive data centers needed for AI And this is why we're seeing countries like US, China, and even the Gulf states investing heavily in energy infrastructure to support AI. Then we have the data centers, so the cloud infrastructures with the GPUs and the TPUs I just mentioned. So this capacity becomes a form of national or corporate power, shaping who can run the largest models or who can push the boundaries of AI innovation. And then you mentioned it, there is talent, so scientific talent and innovation ecosystems that are, of course, very, very crucial. And so we have, of course, Silicon Valley, but Beijing, and then, of course, now Toronto, Paris, Abu Dhabi. I mean, there are many actors now in this game. And the whole goal is to have the right mix all of that. I mean, if you want to be a major player. Now, I would like to raise maybe a few warnings and some questions and a perspective from Europe, but I'm sure that Antoine will go on that perspective. First of all, I warn you that you should always be careful when we talk about the energy consumption of AI. I think that there are a lot of books and a lot of papers that are mixing AI and digital transition. Digital transition is something, and AI is part of the digital transition. But for instance, if we are looking at the greenhouse gases emissions, so the numbers, nobody agrees really on the numbers, but the order of magnitudes of the digital transition, I think it's 4% of the worldwide emissions. And AI is 0.2 or 0.3% of that. We see too many. I'm not saying it's growing exponentially. So maybe in 10 years, it's going to be much more. But as of today, we have to be very careful because we discuss a lot about the consumption, which is totally crazy. And even same thing about the rare earth elements and critical minerals. We are using them for many, many things that is not AI. And we have a tendency to just put everything in one block and blame AI for everything. So I just warn you about that. That was the first comment I wanted to do about these different factors. The second one is about Europe and the place of Europe, where there is a sovereignty issue, clearly. And I just want maybe to raise more questions than bringing solutions, which is something pretty hard. And focus on one thing that I know particularly well, which is the problem of data centers. And in France, particularly, I mean, sovereignty is a major issue in Europe, and everybody talks about it, and particularly related to having our own cloud infrastructures in France or in Europe. Now we talk a lot about it, but there's not so much thing going on, I must say. I'm a little bit surprised by that. It's a major issue, but it's not really directly addressed. And lately, there were some announcements, particularly in France, of massive investments from the Emirates. So it looks like we want to counterbalance the US infrastructure or the GAFAM, and we're saying, oh, we are going to use Emirates like it's better, but we have the same sovereignty problem, and it looks like we don't address it really. It's really weird because on one way we just talk about it. On the one hand, we talk about it all the time. On the other hand, we don't do much, and we take investment for foreign countries, and we say, oh, this is very good news. And even though we would decide at the level of Europe, it's not going to be decided at the level of France, to try to build long-term cloud infrastructure that will be a rival for the big GAFAM cloud infrastructures. It will take a long time if we succeed, even. If we take a long time, what do we do meanwhile? This is something that we have to address, and I feel like Europe is not really discussing about that, and for me, it's a major issue. So that's an introduction, and I tried to raise the question. I hope I did my job. Now I leave the floor to Wendy.
So Wendy, you're focused on China and technology. How do you see China positioning itself in that competition?
Yes, hi, happy to be here. So keep it short. So China sees artificial intelligence as a key technology for strengthening its economic and national security, I mean, much like everybody else, but also China. And it has been doing this for a long time. So it has poured vast resources into developing this technology since well before the ChatGPT moment in 2022. Now, this ChatGPT moment has also really heightened the belief, kind of focused the world in believing that AI is going to fundamentally change the way we live and work. And it has this transformative potential to maybe alter the global power order. Accordingly, the US is intent in slowing the Chinese progress, specifically in military and security aspects of AI. So the US, as we know, has taken actions to slow down China's development, and this is playing out primarily in the export controls on advanced semiconductors, the AI chips that Emmanuel referred to, the GPUs, and the manufacturing equipment to make these chips, as the AI chips are necessary to train and run large AI models. So for the past few years, we've seen this back and forth where China's trying to develop their own chips, and meanwhile, they're trying to, work with existing stockpiles as they develop their own large language models. And there's just nonstop reporting on, oh, this new model came out, how good is it compared to OpenAI, et cetera, et cetera. Now, so as these export restrictions keep getting tighter and tighter on NVIDIA chips and on manufacturing equipment, the call for self-reliance in China and AI has become a more pressing focus. So the government support for this AI development is most concentrated in the hardware layer in the chips, as opposed to the software, because on the chips, it's a little harder under the restrictions, and it's just a much more capital-intensive sector. So there have been massive state-led funds that just invested in the semi supply chain up and down. And Huawei is in the lead, has sort of emerged as the semiconductor kind of head of the national team. And so now it's working with SMIC, which is the primary fab inside China, and it has most of their capacities, and it's making these homegrown AI chips. So they're still less performant, but also to Emmanuel's point earlier, it's not about the individual chip sometimes, it's about the data center. So they're also making different gains in infrastructure and in making these chips kind of perform beyond their, well, basically leaning on power consumption, which China has a lot to make these data centers powerful. So on the software side of things, like I said, it's a little easier for China. China's doing a little better on that side. And part of the reason is because of its long-time participation in open source communities. So thanks to companies like Meta, there's a vibrant open source LLM scene. So and participation in that has caused China to really been neck and neck with worldwide development. So with the DeepSeek moment, of course, now it's quite competitive, and DeepSeek within China has spurred widespread local adoption. So everybody, like small businesses in every sector, is trying to get their hands on DeepSeek, sometimes in these one-off machines, and trying to figure out what they can do with it. So tech companies play a big role, of course, in this development, like Meta, like we said. On the Chinese side, Alibaba is kind of their leader on the software side of things, leading a lot of the open source initiatives and the software developments. So now that the battle over LLM development is kind of winding down, because we've got like our kind of leaders on both sides, deployment is going to be the key to continued development and success. So here, the big tech continues to play a pivotal role. So US cloud is dominated by the big players that we know about, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. OpenAI is trying to build its own data centers, of course, and foreign entities, like we mentioned, Saudi Arabia, UAE, the ones who have sort of the resource. Basically, everybody wants data sovereignty if they can. The Chinese big techs want the same things, and the BAT and ByteDance, they're ramping up to do the same thing. Last thing I will say is Chinese government is focusing on the next step, which is turning LLM development into AI integration. So building applications on top of DeepSeek or whatever else. There's an AI Plus initiative, which is showing up a lot in government work reports and stuff, and it's going to come through in procurement and other initiatives to try and integrate. So come up with applications for AI across all sectors. So we can kind of look forward to the developments in that, I think, in the next months and years.
Thank you very much. Any comment, Emmanuel or Antoine, on what Wendy just said?
Well, again, maybe bring some element to this picture. Super interesting to hear the perspective on China. As you said in the introduction, so I've been working at Meta for over almost 10 years, from the beginning of the creation of the AI lab in 2014 until 2023, basically until the release of the first Llama model. And so of course, when I joined Meta, AI was basically like an academic endeavor for some people. And when I left it, it was a geopolitical key asset. So that's actually quite interesting to see. This decade was pretty intense. And so now I work for a European company that's Helsing, that's doing defense, which is something that we can get into. But if I look at the European perspective to cast a bit of light and also maybe try to be a bit of a contrast with what I see in the US, of course, we talk a lot about investment. The thing we need to see is that these are investments that are not, and Emmanuel said it very well, if you do investment now, first off, in Europe, you do it with money that doesn't come from Europe. That's another factor. But if you do investment now, the return on investment is not now. It's in a few years from now. And the problem is that the investment in the US, they haven't started now or 3 years ago. They started 15 years ago, right? And so this is not just like the amount that the Stargate program is announcing by OpenAI and Oracle to build a new data center. That's the top of it. But then everything else below, right? R&D investment for Meta from the year, including augmented reality, virtual reality, and AI, was 50 billion every year for the last, I think, 5 or 6 years. Just for Meta. For a lot of stuff that didn't work, by the way. So was it money extremely well spent? It's not clear always, but that's also part of the game. So that's also the thing, is that when we have the announcement now that we have 25 billion or 50 billion for France for the announcement, that's something that Meta invested like less to double that for like 5 years. Google did the same, and you can go on and go on. So that's also the trajectory is very important for me to look at trajectories as well, because now we start to realize things. But for people like Emmanuel and I who've been in AI, this stuff don't come out of a vacuum. They've been there for quite some time, and the trends are pretty strong. And so what makes it even harder now is that I think right now my vision is that generative AI, for instance, is not ready. For me, there's no business of generative AI right now. Okay, I don't think this is good enough. I think we make a big fuss about it. I think there is a lot of big money. But if you look at all the big generative AI players, they're losing money on any query, on any prompt. They're losing money, okay? Whether you pay the pro or the free, you're losing money. So it's a business. It's a business right now where the more you have users, the more you lose money. That's literally what happens in generative AI. So of course, so this is not yet a business. I would say yet. It's not yet a business. We should be clear on that, right? So they are raising more money to cope with the loss that they're making, because even if you have subscribers or users, you're losing money on every prompt because of the compute to serve the models and to train the new generation. So that's something we need to keep in mind as well. When you have new users for OpenAI, it's a blessing and a curse. It's more users, but it's actually more cost on them. Okay, and it's the same for DeepSeek. It's the same for all of them. It's not the same for Meta, where generative AI is used to put in the ads business, and so actually this is bringing actually a lot of money, but it's not exactly, I would say, a generative AI business. So the point is that it's not yet a business, and yet we need to invest crazy amount of money to win the race. So that's the tricky. That's also why I'm saying it's a bit like You need to have massification investment to potentially be in the race of something that doesn't yet work, but that we know will be a pivotal role in the future. That's super hard for government to do. That's super hard for government to do, right? That's and so especially at the amount of investment that are needed. You know, it's not a plan that's a few hundreds or a few dozens of millions that you need for a couple of years because of the next election, right? This is 2 or 3 orders of magnitude compared to that. And yet you cannot say I'm going to generate 5 startups, I'm going to raise that much money out of it. You know, it's a bit more complex than that. So I think that's, for me, that's the main worry. Open source is thankfully there, which means that it's leveling the playing field a little bit. That's also why there's so much open source, because once again, the business is not yet there. So actually people are still figuring out stuff. And so that's good. That's really good. But it's still at the mercy. Europe is at the mercy of China or US open sourcing their models. That's really what happens. And actually people were relieved in Europe when DeepSeek was open source. Say, oh God, we're not just dependent on Meta. Okay, so that gives a little bit and you want alternatives. And by the way, you mentioned Abu Dhabi, Emmanuel. They are on the same field. They want to invest here because they don't want to be dependent on China and the US stopping open sourcing at some point. You know, they have the same problem. So they say, maybe if I put my chip in Europe, I have a third way and I can hedge my bets. That's basically what they're doing. They're hedging their bets in terms of model provenance. Once again, not really knowing exactly what these models are going to come as big revenue sources. They bring utilities right now, but this is not the $1 trillion revenue source that we're expecting for. So I think this one is for me, that's what is super hard, is that you need to invest crazy amount of money for something where this is still, like, for me, a lot of R&D work, but super expensive R&D work. And at the European scale, it should be done at the European scale, and we still have national strategies. So I think this is just completely not reaching the right level of ambition, right? Because the only way we can have the investment is Germany, France, and the other actually try to invest together in AI. That's maybe the only way we can have something credible. But that's I've been saying that for a long time, and it's not doing that. So another, maybe a last point on that. Sorry, maybe I'm a bit controversial, but the last point on that is this aspect of speed. I think what's clearly there is that what we're seeing now is innovation is accelerating. So we still don't have the killer application. I think we don't have, but still the rapidity at which innovation are coming and the compounding innovation is actually very, very massive. So you have a lot of new functions coming up. So it's very hard to keep up with everything that's going. It's very hard to keep up with everything. So that means that the price to enter the race is getting harder and harder, because if you say, okay, I'm going to put everything in that I have and I'm going to sprint for 1 year to get there, in 1 year, the state of the art might have changed way, way more than if you had started a year ago, etc. You know, this stuff are actually accelerating very fast. So it's very tricky for people to enter the race and even to stay in the race. If you look at the generative AI race, because of the complexity of the technology and the cost, there is very few actors are still left, right? There's been a boom in 2022, 2023. Who's left? The big guys, okay? Google, Meta. Microsoft is not really in the race anymore. You know, they're surveying the OpenAI. So I would say they're supplying models, but they're not really training their own models. So Apple has never been there. Amazon is not there. So this stuff is complex. If Amazon is not having his own stuff, it's complex. So you have Google and Meta, and then you have OpenAI, of course, Anthropic. But seriously, Anthropic is maybe a scam. I don't know. We need to figure it out. But that's they have so much money for a very, very small. I mean, it's a lesser OpenAI. So, but on that. And then you have the Chinese, of course, that you mentioned, Alibaba with the Qwen models, DeepSeek, etc. Which are, but it's more any Mistral in Europe, which is the only one that stands, but that's not doing like a lot of pre-training of big large language models anymore. They do smaller models that are to apply to find use cases. So I would call that they're not in the frontier AI business anymore because they cannot support the cost. Maybe Arthur, if he was there, would contradict that, but I think that's the case. So that's very, very complex, and we need to be able to keep innovating on that very, very frequently, and that's very complicated. So I will stop there for now, but happy to take questions or comment on my.
And maybe Jean-Marie, if you allow myself, we haven't talked about the role of regulation. If I asked the question during the last panel, but nobody really answered. But we are, I think, we should ask the question whether we have a chance to be in the race if we are fighting with countries that deregulate totally. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, we want to regulate in Europe because we think it's a good thing. But is it not something that is going to make us just the last one in the race for AI? I don't know. I don't know. I'm Antoine. I would like to have your point of view on that. What do you think of regulation in Europe?
Yeah, I think yeah, I mean, I agree, regulation, but I think we've talked a lot about regulation. I think at some point, I don't think regulation is the thing that have forbidden us to have like a big AI player. I think it caused a lot of. I mean, it might be a rainbow effect because it discouraged people, and you need a lot of courage to go in this race because it's a bit insane. So I think there's more like a mental breakdown and a complexity, but I think in the fact, I don't think this has been the major impact. When you go, and and people here in this room, I guess you've been to traveling a lot, and you've been to California or to China, I hope. And when you go to California, the level of ambition and the level of, I think, foolishness about I'm going to build this and going to change the world is true, right? So there's a lot of that is building like, yeah, I will train my model in 1 million GPU in 3 years. Yeah, it's possible. I have like $10 in my pocket, but yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm exaggerating, but there's a little bit of that. And if you go back to the state I'm saying before, these stuff are super expensive and a bit crazy and all stuff. You need these people. And I think in Europe, I think my take, Emmanuel, is more like we're also a bit more conservative in terms of we need to be realistic with regard to the investment. And so our regulation, I think, play maybe in this mindset that needs to be within that. But I would say, I think it's more second order effect. So I see the Mistral founders that I know very well because they were at Meta with me. When they started it, I thought it was crazy. I would never have done that if I had them. It was like, oh, we're going to compete with OpenAI, starting a company in France. I was like, yeah, really? you want that? And they said, yeah, because we feel we can have a better model than OpenAI. And you don't have that many people that come with this really like core belief. Whether they're wrong, right or wrong, you need people like start from that, say, okay, yeah, we're going, and then investors follow that, and here they are. But you don't have that many people that have a bit this crazy thing. And usually the European I know, when they're doing that for real, they did it in the US. That was a bit of the problem as well. The people who really have this founder mindset. This is changing, but once again, this is going to take time until it really, really percolates in Europe.
For Wendy, I mean, do you see China with the masses of data that they collect and a different attitude to protection of data than what we have in Europe, for instance? Is that a comparative advantage for China that China can take advantage of?
It's interesting. Yeah, when it comes to regulations, China's an interesting case because you would think they have more data, but it's not necessarily true. At the onset of the LLM battle, there's actually a lot of speculation that maybe they have lower quality data because of the way their internet is organized, whether there'll be enough data to train their AI models to perform at the same level. So one thing to say about China, they have a lot of data and they're also super protective of their data, right? So going beyond just LLMs, as we know, even their road data or their personal data, really any data or even their maps data, right? They have they have a very comprehensive regime that controls the gathering and the processing and the storing of data, which is also something that's kind of a competitive advantage if you want to operate inside China. So just look at, for example, Tesla trying to deploy their self-driving technology there. They're running into a lot of trouble because they're not allowed to take Chinese road data outside of China. Whereas, yeah, so I think that's something to consider, especially from the European perspective, considering the reverse case for competitiveness purposes.
Now, I have a question maybe for the AI data specialist, Emmanuel and Antoine. I mean, we heard in the morning that, and we heard from you, Emmanuel, that in the work, in the research on AI now, there are attempts to look at how you develop intelligence more emulating what human beings do, how a child develops his own intelligence, rather than through these masses of data. So when we listen to you, I mean, it gives the impression of a huge concentration of power, where a few companies in the world have the resources to manage those enormous masses of data to train models, and the rest of the world just follows behind, and we haven't spoken, well, we spoke about the global south with India earlier, but we see whole continents like Africa essentially out of the race. In the evolution of research on AI, do you see the possibility of models that are less data intensive, so to speak, and that would give a chance to countries which do not have the enormous resources that are required at the moment?
I could start. Okay, Antoine.
Yeah.
First of all, not all even if we're talking about the AI of today, not all of the data needs a lot of data. I mean, a lot of AI needs that enormous amount of data. And as we explained during the last panel, it's not only, I mean, the size of data is important, but it's not, as we see with China, with what Wendy said. I mean, it's not because you are a big country with a lot of people that you have a lot of data, and that's then you are the king of the world because of that. The data has to be of quality, standardized, and so on. And quality of data is somewhere maybe for a lot of applications more important than the size of the data that you can have access to. So in that sense, I would say that, for instance, Europe has a race to play. I mean, if Europe organizes itself by gathering some very high standards quality of data, that is extremely useful and that is extremely important. And I don't see any, maybe I'm wrong, but my feeling is that I don't see any country, I mean, talking at a national level, I'm not talking about industries, I don't see any countries that is way ahead of other countries in terms of data. Everybody is kind of behind in terms of organizing the data and making them interoperable, clean, and of quality. So I think there is a huge room for a lot of players in that race for data and quality data. That's what I think. Now it's the race that is happening today, so we have to take it now. It's not, we don't have to wait.
Yeah, I mean, I agree on the data quality. I think I mean, maybe no country is ahead of the race, Emmanuel. I think, I mean, I don't know the full picture, but I think I could agree with this as well. But I think the companies are way ahead. So this is not, so
Yes, I agree. The companies are way ahead. I totally agree.
They will once again because of compounding investment as well. So if you, it's that, okay, you say Facebook has a lot of data, or YouTube has a lot of data. They have a lot of data. They build on data. Their business is data. So that's clearly. But it's also that I think they realized the value of data very early. And so, so of course now it's helping for AI, whereas before it was just data for serving data. And so now it's data for AI. So there's this culture. And what I see, and you know, we've talked about it sometimes, like, you need also this culture about the quality of data, the curating. This is stuff that is not considered noble as well in terms of this data sourcing, etc. And so we have hard time in the public sector to find people, to hire people. You know, you need high quality people to build high quality data. And for a long time, it was not considered a high value task. So there was a bit this problem, and now it is. But so whereas in Meta, I can tell you, people that are doing the data, they are super high in the chain because of course this is the gold mine of the things. So so that's a bit but it's true that general public data and some data that is very high value and that the government and the countries own. You know, this one I think there is still work to be done. And I work in defense, so different data is actually very specific, and there's a lot of impact of the government on the data, of course, on the topic I'm working on right now. So I can really agree to this. The second point, just on the point about the rates, etc., is that to go back to the point about the new method that are maybe less data hungry, it doesn't mean that they're less compute hungry, though. So we are switching to a mode maybe where we are going to try, if you have very high quality data, maybe you will put more compute on this data to actually make better models as well. So I think the point of having data center and compute resources, I don't think this one is going away. Right? You might put less data, but more high quality data, but you will put more compute at it. What you've seen with DeepSeek and O3, etc., is that actually you put more compute at inference time for one prompt, right? You put more compute for one prompt to answer, so inference time. But now people are starting to think that for any given example you have to train, you need to put more data as well. Like the way that, if you think about the analogy of people, like the way that when you have a very hard exercise, you will think a lot of the answer, etc., before answering. And so this is a bit what's happening in O3 or the model like that do that at testing, but they're not trained like that. And so now people say, I need to train like that, which means that for any given example, I might need maybe 10x more compute. And so then you're back into, if I have a bigger data center, I can try more things around that.
I want to move to the military. And Antoine, so you've moved from a data-centric company, so to speak, with Meta, and now you are importing that data culture, so to speak, in the military domain. And I noticed what you said about also the speed. And when we spoke preparing the panel, you mentioned, I mean, that you are, for instance, present in Ukraine, and where you see the speed of turning innovation into actual military capability. So could you talk a bit about that and how that?
Yeah, of course. And I think we saw a striking example this weekend with the operation by the Ukrainian in Russia, which is, of course, incredible in terms of logistics and planning and intelligence. But at the core of it, you have strike drones, so small quadcopters that are carrying an explosive charge. And I guess you've all seen the news. They were able to take down very strategic bombing planes for Russia for maybe one drone cost 10K, and one of the big Russian plane might cost maybe $500 million. So maybe you need a few drones to take it down, but obviously the cost is really crazy. So this is what people call now about asymmetric warfare, which is a bit what the Houthis have been doing in the Red Sea also for quite some time, right? They're actually harassing all the big ships with very cheap drones. And so so this is really coming. The point there is that offense is way cheaper than defense now. Okay, so it's very easy, really, to build drones with an explosive charge. It's really not very hard. That's and the Houthis can do it. They are good, but this is not like the French military or the US military, right? But they can operate that, and they can build a big troublemakers because for them launching these drones is not very complex, but it's very complex to defend against them, and it's much more expensive, right? When the French Navy needs to defend against the Houthis, they usually use Aster missile. This Aster missile, they cost roughly 1 million euros, maybe a bit less, for the drone that costs 10K. So of course, that's the symmetry there. And how we got there is maybe to your question. It's the speed of innovation, which is for me the most striking. Is that when the second invasion of Ukraine by Russia started, there was nothing about drones in warfare. It was very, very, very limited. The beginning was people were talking about this is World War I again. You have in France, we are very proud about the Caesar cannon that we give, which is like very strong, like artillery, classical artillery, and you have the front line, etc. And now we are at the stage where the Ukrainian can do deep strike in Russian territory with strike drones, and this took 3 years, a bit less. This is completely insane. So of course you can look at the beginning and the end, and we can, if you want, I can tell you a bit some of the technological steps that went, because there's a few. But what's very interesting for me is that you went from there is nothing to be able to strike thousands of kilometers in enemy territory in 3 years, and which means that you have the capability to build it, but you also have the capability to operate it, and you have the capability to actually put it in your doctrine, because it's not one random guy doing it. This is a whole unit using that. So, which is unlike the Houthis, for instance, the Ukrainian can use that as a weapon that they are, for which they know exactly the way of operation and they can operate it, etc. So it's very mature. That's my word. It's very mature for them. It's not even that something that they finished on the weekend. It's 1.5 years of preparation. That's what they said. So this is not like, oh, someone who cooked up something in the back of a car and it gets. This is very deep, and this happened in less than 3 years. And so why has this happened? Because you have this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, where basically Ukraine needs to innovate at all costs to keep an advantage or to keep defending, because they have less people, less ammunition, less of everything, right? So they need to have smarter ideas. And so when you do that, well, what happens is that you have an acceleration of technological capabilities. Okay, I'm going to build drones. Oh, then you can jam my drones. Well, I'm going to build those that can be jammed. Then I will jam differently, etc. So all these stuff are compounding to each other, and that's what we saw. And if you move out of Ukraine, and I don't think we are in Ukraine, so we see that really firsthand. And if you move out of Ukraine, then what does it say for the countries that are not in this conflict? That either you take as much lessons or return of experience from that, so that you can use that to adapt your doctrine and things. So that I cannot be late to these new innovations, and I guess China, I think, is doing that pretty well. Or you're saying, okay, this is not my stuff, and I'm just keeping doing things that I'm going to do, and I have my program that are going on 10 years timeline, etc. And that's a bit what we're seeing sometimes, is that we try to bring, and I think now it's coming, the fact that this acceleration is coming there. This is a new way of waging war. Okay, and it happened in a matter of years, not in a matter of decades. And for the military, this is a big change, not the big change of what they can do, the big change of how fast it happened.
Wendy, when looking at China, do you see China drawing lessons from what's going on in Ukraine and in the way Chinese military and Chinese technology connect?
Well, I think a very recent example that I was thinking about when Antoine was speaking is the conflict between India and Pakistan just a couple of weeks ago. So for the Chinese, it was an unexpected moment where it seemed like their weapons that they've been developing and exporting was tested in the battlefield for the first time. So I actually wanted to ask Antoine what he thought about this. So of course, within the domestic reporting, there's a lot of hype around how well their fighter jet did. But there's also so either it's about the jet, which is not even the latest jet, it's just one of the jets, but or it's about the integration of their various weapons. So my understanding is that since Pakistan has a whole system of Chinese equipment, they're able to integrate with each other better than whatever India had. Of course, a lot of this reporting is a little bit debated. So there's definitely, I would say, a lot of effort on the Chinese part and looking at lessons. And I would say on the flip side, Taiwan is also trying to draw a lot of lessons from Ukraine and how it's able to maybe launch asymmetric warfare, or sorry, not launch, rather defend using much less resources compared to the Chinese army. So I think, yeah, everybody's looking at this very carefully. And I would love to hear, Antoine, whether you think AI has a lot to do with what China's building.
Yeah, well, I don't have a ton of info. I think on the Chinese fighter jet operated by Pakistan that take down a Rafale by India, right? So I don't have a lot of insider info because, of course, India never confirmed that. But it seems very likely. Why it's not clear, but I think when if I take one step back from what I've seen, talking also to Air Force militaries across the different air forces, is that there are actually two levels in which air dominance is extremely important. It might be the most important thing of strategy for the next 10, 15 years. It's because that's why also Ukraine is taking so much time, is that nobody is able to have air dominance. Otherwise, it would have been done a long time ago. So that's why the US are investing a lot in uncrewed aerial vehicles, etc., which we can talk about as well, these unmanned fighter jets. But so right now, there are two levels in which you can try to gain capabilities in the air. there is one which you have better fighter jet or as good. So the new stealth from Japanese, for the Chinese, but also the F-35 or F-22s, etc. So you have the next generation, maybe the Rafale F-6 or whatever. So there's this. So of course, better and better. But there's a second aspect, and it's also, I think, for me, pretty important in how you see AI all over, is how you are able to train the humans to use the new assets. And you can use that for like generative AI to actually fight the jets, right? It's the same. It's like at some point there is a human involved, and I think it will stay. So how fast are you able to train your military, etc., to use this new type of asset? That's also, I think, a big lesson from Ukraine, is that they're able to use these new weapons and use new wage war very quickly. It doesn't take them 10 years of training. And so if I go to China and Chinese Air Force, their new fighters are becoming extremely performant, but the Chinese Air Force doesn't have a lot of tactical experience. They've never been in real fights, etc. So I think there was always this fact about, if you talk to experienced Air Force, like, we have this experience, this human capital, because these people have been in combat, they've been doing that, they know how it is, etc. So, maybe you can catch up on the planes, but we still have the human capital. But then where AI comes in is that now you have this AI co-pilot in the planes that can help you also to this is the best tactical decision, or this is maybe the weapon you should use, or this is maybe what we guess the enemy could do. And using that, you can try to bridge the gap. It's like basically when you have a very good programmer and an average programmer with AI copilot. It will not be as good necessarily, but you will close the gap and it can be as productive, right? So there is a bit of this happening in the armies as well. That, maybe actually they can catch up on the hardware, if you want, but also on the human capital, because they can help them in the cockpit or they can train them faster. You can also have that. And that's actually a very striking, and that's why there's a lot of investment in terms of simulation, etc., to be able to train the pilots, etc., which is also very cost effective, by the way, because it's much easier to put virtual reality headset on pilots than to launch a real aircraft for training. And so I think this human in the loop and human with the technology on the battlefield and how you can create this team as fast as possible is a great challenge that people are facing all around the world.
To ask a question that was raised in a previous panel, and then open the floor for more questions. The question was raised about the plan of Donald Trump to have a golden dome to protect the United States, and the question whether AI plays a role in making such a project realistic or not, and how much it's linked to the progress that we're discussing.
Yeah, so I guess it's a bit for me. So I don't have all the details about this plan, so I want to be clear on that.
Nobody has.
But yeah, nobody does. No, I can say, but I can try to be pretty concrete in terms of where AI can use in air defense, because it's a big air defense system. Right now, and air defense works quite well, but when with human operators operating like Patriot missiles or these kind of things. But there's already automations there, because when you have a cruise missile coming at you, you don't have enough time as an operator to shoot yourself. It needs to be triggered automatically. Right? This is already happening, it's already working. So then what's going to be trickier and trickier is that when you launch like saturation attack or cognitive saturation attack, where you launch different types of assets on different targets in the same zone. You have missiles that are targeting the radars, you have maybe drones that are targeting, I don't know, the base, etc. And the problem there is that you need to do prioritization exercise for the operator. Do I protect this and shoot that, etc. Right? This kind of, and of course, there's a lot of doctrine and they have a lot of plans for that. But if you try to complexify it by launching stuff that are very complex, then it starts to be complex in terms of this ordering, which is, Emmanuel would know, is a very famous problem in computer science, where you try to order and do planification and collaboration research. And now I think it will come more and more into play in terms of you will have actually a system that will try to design the strategy for air defense to tell you, okay, if your main objective is to protect the base, then this is what you should do. You will lose the radar. You might lose one ship, but you keep the base. These kind of things. And then the operator could act on that. So this is something very concrete that AI will clearly be deployed for.
Open the floor for questions. Plenty of hands raised. Okay. Yes, maybe
Okay.
a couple of questions together.
So my question, hi, thanks to the panelists. My name is Bastian. We here are sort of in the business of trying to promote peace and conflict resolution. And it strikes me that we're slipping back as the world back into the tragic and very traditional security dilemma between states, which is represented in the record defense spending that we're seeing in the world, and essentially this logic of either you try to jump on board with defense innovation and armaments innovation, or you might fall behind in that competition. So I wondered, though, with your professional perspectives on this issue, what do you think we need as diplomats in our toolbox to be able to address these type of developments when hopefully there come a time where there needs to be some sort of a ceasefire with these capabilities that's being observed? What kind of capabilities would be needed to be dealing with these type of developments? Thanks so much.
That we see innovation spinning up. Can arms control speed up in the same way? While diplomats are sort of running behind to understand the transformation of technology. Second question, and then we'll.
Yeah, thank you. Amelie with the EU. So my question is also maybe more towards Antoine, also on the military side and operations. We talked a lot about governance actors. I would be interested how, the use of AI and just in general the operational application or even quick training that you referred to. I mean, that being difficult, but that in the future also we would be speeding that up for our non-state armed actors. Do you see, is there any kind of already procedures in place where you think that this will be something taken up on the non-state armed group side? Or do you think there's regulations that UN actors in general, or I mean, government actors should be looking into in terms of, you know, mitigating risks of any kind of this technology also falling into hands that where the control is no longer really feasible?
Yeah, so I think I can try to take the two questions at once. Because I think there's a bit related in my mind. So I think for the second one, it's not clear for me that the regulation we talked about around export control or this kind of thing needs to be changed, right? Everything we do is subject to the export control regulation that's already in place. There was software before AI, there is software now. And so in terms of what can you do and how you do the technology, how can it be disseminated, etc., I think you can control software as well. So what we do is not open source, etc. When we put AI embedded in our drones, for instance, which is something that we do, the AI needs a specific key to be activated, and if the key is not present, the whole like chip is burned after one hour, etc. So there is a lot of like this operational security constraint that are about, because these are when these are weapons, they are regulated. So I'm not sure this is very different from what we do. Then it's more like the use of generative AI that's completely open source, but I think that's not exactly what we do on that. But to answer a bit on that and the previous one as well, I think the toolbox on that is that I think what we're seeing in the decades before the ones that we're in, or even before, is that actually defense has been a big driver for technological innovation for a long time, right? Even my PhD actually in 2006 was funded by the DGA in France, and my postdoc was funded by DARPA. And it was before AI was a big thing. And they were also just like funding, because there's always been this culture about this. And of course, you know, all the technological advances that came from military and defense, and has peeled over in a lot of the civilian sector and non-military sector. So I think what we are seeing now with the investments, and that's clearly what's happening in the US, is that a lot of the advances that are going to do in AI, and some parts of AI, I think will be driven by the military investment, but they might spill over. Maybe not for generative AI, because generative AI is very specific stuff, and even military has not enough funding to compete with big tech. Okay, I think that's just the way it is. But for many other use cases, I think this might be the case. And the big one that is on the horizon that we don't talk about it much, but more and more, is robotics. So robotics. So I talked about drones, which are flying robots, of course, but if you talk about quadruped or robots on wheels or robots on humanoid robots, etc., this stuff will be driven a lot, I think, by or through defense or simulatory defense and security investment. I think this is the case in I mean, for drone, it's clearly the case. Okay, for underwater drone, it's clearly the case. For space, also robotics stuff is clearly the case. For humanoid robots, it's not so the case because the use case is not clear. So I don't say it's always that, but I feel that some of this stuff where you have what we call embodied AI, so AI that goes into the world and do that. This is something that actually the military has been very pushing for a long time, and so it's pretty natural for that. And one point on that, this is clearly a place where China is ahead of the US. And I think this type of geopolitical tension, this will be an interesting one to watch, because as much as generative AI, as Wendy said, they were able to catch up pretty quickly with Alibaba and DeepSeek. I think on robotics, especially quadruped and humanoid robotics, they are ahead. And so if this becomes prime time technology, how are the US going to react to that? Because this might be the first time where something that important, they are not leading.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
I'll try again. Thank you. Thank you for giving us this sort of forward-looking view of what things might look like on the military side. On the civilian side, can you give us your just hunch over the next 5 or 10 years? What's going to happen, and how will that affect which countries fall completely behind? How does that affect inequality in the world? Like, give us sort of your big brush picture, so we understood from Antoine that that it's incredibly concentrated in a very small number of companies in a very small number of countries. So what's your hunch as what that means for the world? Thank you.
Emmanuel, you want to take a stab at that?
Thank
you very much. Sorry, so my question is still on the military side, but so that there are some discussions to adopt a legally binding framework to ban the laws, the lethal autonomous weapon system, to using AI, I think, but it has not yet reached agreement. And what do you think about the accountability of military use of AI capabilities?
Okay, so maybe I can take this one very quickly, and Emmanuel, you will not escape the previous one. Yes, no, I think it's a super important topic, and I think it's more generally like universal treaty or universal regulation right now. What are they here for, and how are they respected, right? So that's the first question that I think is at the core of a lot of discussions. For the one you're referring to right now, the AI systems, they are falling under, so they're not autonomous for decision making, and they are falling under the current regulations for armament, right? So there is not new autonomy capabilities. This is something that's in discussion, but right now the doctrine have not changed actually for all the paper, at least for all the countries that Helsing is operating in, which is mostly NATO plus Ukraine.
How do you see? I mean, we have discussed a lot Europe, China, the United States, but in the process we have ignored a few billion people who are not in Europe, China, or the United States, and that matters for the future of the world. Are they going to be spectators of that transformation? Are they going to be actors? Are they going to be victims? When we just talked about robotics, for instance, one can see how the Trump policy of reshoring could indeed bring back some manufacturing capacity in the United States, but maybe most of that manufacturing will be done by robots that will have to be bought from China, maybe, but that's another story. And so what happens to the workers in Vietnam or in Bangladesh or in a variety of countries, or in Sri Lanka or in Africa, who won't have the path to growth that we have seen in recent years, where you go gradually up the value scale, starting with labor-intensive work, and then gradually moving to more high value-added work, as China has done.
It's hard to answer that question. I'm sorry, I don't like to play the prophets of what's going to happen in the 5 years. This is so hard game to play, but India is clearly becoming a more and more important actor on the game, so we should not forget about India. And we are talking about space, and India is a major player in the new space strategy. And with AI techniques, that is very clear. Now about the rest of the world, how it will become, and I'm sorry, I don't have any hints. I mean, it's so hard, and it's moving so fast that I'm not so sure that what I could say is any valuable as any values. I'm sorry.
Now, if I can just
And that's your honor. You don't talk about things you don't know.
Yeah, I think there's
That's a very
one
rare
key.
attitude.
I think there's just one key to this, and then I'm sorry I will have to leave you. It's open source, right? I think as long as the open sourcing trend, and it looks like it's continuing, is going to keep going, there's still a lot of cards that can be played all around the world, because you can build on this gigantic model and apply them. And maybe if you're smart, you can build good use cases, because as I said, I don't think the business has been really found yet. And maybe some people will find
But you have the problem of data. I mean, it's not just the algorithm. You have the problem
the open
of
weight.
finding the right data to fine-tune your models to your country and to adapt it. And if you look at sub-Saharan countries in Africa, I mean, the data is not ready at all.
So yeah, so I don't want to say that it makes everybody on the same page. I'm just saying without open source, it's completely impossible. You lose everybody. So my point is more the key that open source is a big key to the future. I think I'm not saying with it everything's perfect, and without it it's very complex.
Yeah,
Without it is very complex. With it might still be complex, but a bit less so. So if you can act on regulation, and people in this room can think about this, I think looking at open source and how it's treated, I think it's a very interesting one to look at.
But I think Emmanuel mentioning data, in a way, gives us, I mean, it's an objection to what you're saying on open source, but at the same time, it's a source of hope, because maybe one possible way to go is to focus a lot more efforts. We talked yesterday in a panel on the partnership, the required partnership between Europe and Africa, for instance. One aspect of it would be to help improve the quality of data in a number of countries, so that that asset, that quality data is an asset that is not just the privilege of a limited number of countries, but is more spread out. That might be a concrete way, roundabout way, to spread the benefits of this data revolution. I mean, just thinking aloud. I mean, then you know more about it. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think if I could, I think on top of just data and making sure that all corners of the world have their own kind of AI model, I think it's important to kind of stress also that it's going to be whether people have access to do something with these models, right? So it ultimately still comes down to not just having the model, but having access to data centers and stuff to deploy these models and build on top of it. And so I think we will continue to see kind of the big countries leading. But I would say that now that the big models have sort of, a lot of them have been built, maybe this conversion to smaller models and more application focus will give the smaller countries a chance to compete by maybe building applications and having that spread to the rest of the world and gaining a competitive advantage that way. And then maybe those things will go across the world.
I'm sorry, I really need to go. I thank you, everybody. And
we are over time, so I want to thank the panelists. Wendy Chang, Antoine Bordes, and if I may, particular word for Emmanuel Bacry, who has been with us now for 4 hours. And I'm particularly grateful because he has helped a lot putting together this. Thank you.
Thank you.